Live from London, this is BBC News. Donald Trump's presidential campaign accuses the UK's Labour Party of foreign interference in the US election. The US Secretary of State says now is the time for Israel to end the war in Gaza to capitalise on its success against Hamas. Fresh airstrikes overnight in Beirut will bring you the latest from our correspondents in the region. The UK is to sign a new defence agreement with Germany as it seeks to strengthen post-Brexit ties with Europe. And after their trip to Australia, King Charles and Queen Camilla arrive in Samoa for a Commonwealth summit. Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm Catherine Biarahanga. We start in the US, where Donald Trump's presidential campaign has made a legal complaint against the Labour Party here for what it claims is illegal foreign contributions and interference in the US election. A statement from the Trump-Vance campaign says the far-left Labour Party has inspired Kamala's dangerous liberal policies and rhetoric. In recent weeks, they have recruited and sent party members to campaign for Kamala in critical battleground states, attempting to influence our election. A now deleted social media post from a senior Labour official said there were 10 spots available to travel to the US and that the party would sort housing for volunteers. But Labour officials say activists who've been campaigning for Kamala Harris are doing so in a personal capacity and are not organised or funded by the party. For some context, a foreign national can participate in campaign activities as long as they're not being paid for it, according to the Federal Election Commission. This is not the first time that either Labour or Conservative Party staff have campaigned in the US election. Our North America correspondent Peter Bowes reports.
Donald J. Trump.
US election interference by the Labour Party. The claim being made by Donald Trump's campaign that Britain's ruling party and Kamala Harris's campaign have broken the law. In a 6-page letter to America's election watchdog, the Federal Election Commission, a lawyer for the Trump campaign cites media reports about contact between Labour and the Harris campaign and requests an immediate investigation into blatant foreign interference with apparent illegal foreign national contributions made by the Labour Party. The row revolves around efforts by Labour to send volunteers to the states to help Kamala Harris. The letter cites this now deleted post on the networking site LinkedIn, apparently from a senior Labour official saying 10 spots were available to travel to the US and that the party would sort housing for volunteers. The Trump campaign says that suggests Labour is financially supporting volunteers. It's not illegal for foreign nationals to campaign in US elections, but they can't be paid for it. In a statement, the Trump campaign said Kamala Harris and her running mate Tim Walz were seeking foreign influence to boost what it called their radical message. The Harris campaign's acceptance and use of this illegal foreign assistance is just another feeble attempt in a long line of anti-American election interference. Donald Trump's former ambassador to Germany, Richard Grenell, who's tipped to be part of the former president's new administration if he wins the election, told Newsnight it was a slippery slope for Labour.
I think is a really dangerous precedent to have the ruling party of a ally somehow playing politics, getting involved in the actual campaigning with such a short notice. I mean, it's the last month of our campaign.
Sir Keir Starmer has played down the significance of the Trump campaign's allegations, pointing out that Labour had volunteers who'd gone to America pretty much every election, doing it in their spare time and staying with other volunteers. The Prime Minister added that he and Donald Trump had established a good relationship when they met in New York last month. Peter Bowes, BBC News.
Well, our political editor Chris Mason is travelling with the Prime Minister in Samoa for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, where the Trump row threatens to overshadow the trip.
Hello from Winnipeg in the Canadian province of Manitoba. We're on our way to the South Pacific, to Samoa, for a gathering of Commonwealth Heads of Government. To put it gently, it's a long way. We've still got a long, long way to go. Quite the row, though, bubbling whilst we've been on the first leg of this flight between Donald Trump and the UK Labour Party. You know, it's only a couple of weeks ago that Keir Starmer was having dinner with Donald Trump in New York, meeting him for the first time. Now there's this row that centres on a post on LinkedIn, the CV and Jobs website, from a Labour Party staffer, a head of operations, suggesting that people might want to go out to campaign for Kamala Harris, the big rival of Donald Trump, Kamala Harris of the Democrats, the current vice president, with a suggestion that their housing would be sorted. Now that has caused real anger from the Trump campaign, because they reckon that it amounts to illegal electoral interference, particularly the idea that somehow money might have changed hands. Now Labour say that is absolutely not the case. These are volunteers. This happens at every election and it's been blown out of all proportion. Perhaps some injudicious language and the now deleted social media posts at the heart of it. But quite the thing when we are just a couple of weeks away from the US presidential election.
And that was our political editor, Chris Mason. We'll have much more on that story with our chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman, as well as Jared Hill from our US partners, CBS, who'll be giving us the view from the US. Now, King Charles and Queen Camilla have arrived in Samoa for a summit of the 56-nation Commonwealth, as we're hearing from Chris Mason there. The couple has just completed a 6-day tour of Australia, the first time they have visited the country since the King became its head of state. Our correspondent, Katie Watson, was in Samoa as the King and Queen arrived. She said climate change will be high on the agenda during the visit.
This is the first Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting that King Charles is attending since becoming monarch. It's also a first for a Pacific nation for hosting the summit. So it's a really big deal for Samoa, a small country. There are 4,000 delegates expected to come in here. They've had to bring on a cruise ship to accommodate the visitors here this week. Now, top of the agenda will be climate change. Pacific Islands are especially vulnerable when it comes to rising sea levels. But climate change, of course, is something that's very close to the King's heart. He'll be visiting mangrove projects, talking about how to preserve the ocean, also going to the national park and speaking to Samoans about how to make this part of the world much less vulnerable. There'll be a lot of pressure, of course, on bigger members of the Commonwealth to try and cut their fossil fuel emissions and try and help smaller nations like Samoa in terms of climate finance and protecting countries from the climate crisis. The other big topic that's likely to come up is reparations. The UK has said that they won't be apologising, there won't be a formal apology, and there won't be any talk of reparations. Of course, the King can't say anything unless he's been allowed to by the government. So although that's not been tabled, no doubt that's a conversation, especially from smaller nations, that will come up. But certainly climate change is going to be top of the agenda the next few days here in Samoa.
Back with our top story, and Donald Trump's presidential campaign has taken the extraordinary step of filing a legal complaint against the Labour Party, accusing it of blatantly interfering in the American election. Earlier, my colleague at BBC Breakfast, John Kay, asked the Environment Secretary Steve Reed what the party's response to those claims is.
It's up to private citizens how they use their time and their money, and it's not unusual for supporters of a party in one country to go and campaign for a sister party in another. It happens both ways round and across many, many countries. But none of this was organised or funded by the Labour Party itself. This is individual people making their own choices as they're free to do.
I think his complaint, though, goes to the fact that there was a post on LinkedIn, on social media, from a Labour Party manager, which has now been deleted, but which was offering some kind of help for Labour Party members who went to America to help Kamala Harris's campaign. And that is what Donald Trump says is described as reasonable inference that the Labour Party was making what he says amount to illegal foreign national contributions to the American election. What do you say to that?
Well, none of this was organised directly by the Labour Party. As I say, what people choose to do in their free time and whether she's part of a group linked to the Democrats is entirely up to her, and it's up to individuals if they want to use their holiday to go and campaign for a party, a sister party in another country. People are free to do that. It's not against the law here, it's not against the law in the United States, but it certainly wasn't organised by the Labour Party itself.
Well, as promised, we can speak to our chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman. Henry, what could this row mean for the relations between the Labour Party and the Trump campaign?
Well, it's clearly not good. I mean, I don't think there is precedent, certainly not that I'm aware of, for a presidential campaign to be making a legal complaint about a political party that's in government in one of their closest allies. I mean, this is a very big deal. It's very unusual. Perhaps it's yet another symptom of what an unusual politician and what an unusual campaigner Donald Trump is. But then again, the Labour Party, the Labour government may well find themselves within just a couple of weeks having to deal with a very unusual former president-elect who might be returning to the White House. I think the big question here is, there's no denying this is seriously awkward and embarrassing for the Labour Party. The question is whether it is merely awkward and embarrassing but will pass within a couple of days, or whether actually this does show a level of anger from the Trump campaign that would carry over, if he wins the presidential election, into his relationship with Keir Starmer as the UK Prime Minister. If that is the case, then that elevates this from an awkward and surprising row to something much more serious indeed.
And Henry, how unusual is it for UK parties to work with their American colleagues?
Well, not at all, is the truth, and that's why this is quite strange and why Labour people I've been speaking to are pretty bemused that this has blown up in the way it has. I mean, firstly, let's stress, the Labour Party, as you were hearing there from Steve Reid, the Environment Secretary, doesn't believe that they have been assisting the Democratic Party. They say that some of their employees and officials in a private capacity have been volunteering for the Democratic Party, but that's not the same as the Labour Party operating for the Democratic Party, if you see what I mean. And they would say, look, there's all sorts of precedent for volunteers. In fact, there are Conservatives who volunteered for the Republicans, and there are Conservatives who have volunteered in the past for the Democrats because of the way the US political spectrum is perhaps all shifted a bit to the right from the UK. Of course, there's Nigel Farage, the leader of the Reform Party, now a Reform MP, who has been a big campaigner for Donald Trump primarily before he became an MP, but he was out there at the Republican National Convention in the summer relatively recently after he got elected as an MP. So if you ask Labour people, they'd say, look, this has just been happening for years. But what hasn't happened before, what hasn't been happening for years, is a diplomatic spat like this, and that's why it's more serious.
Henry, thank you. That's our chief political correspondent there, Henry Zeffman. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Let's turn to the Middle East, where there have been more strikes overnight in Lebanon. This is the skyline in Beirut this morning after strikes were reported in Bada, which is in a southern suburb of Beirut. It comes as America's top diplomat, Antony Blinken, continues his visit in the region. He was in Israel on Tuesday. He'll now be visiting Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the UAE. In Israel, he urged Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to capitalize on the recent killing of the Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar by securing the release of all hostages and ending the conflict in Gaza. And more developments in Gaza. We just have this news coming in from the World Health Organization saying that it has had to pause the ongoing polio vaccination campaign due to begin on Wednesday in the north of Gaza. As you know, there's been a massive polio vaccination attempt across the territory, trying to vaccinate hundreds of thousands of young children against the polio virus. So news coming in from the World Health Organization is that because of the ongoing fighting in northern Gaza, they say intense bombardments and the mass displacement as a result, they've had to pause the expected polio vaccination there in the north of the territory. Well, we can speak to our correspondent in Jerusalem, Yolande Nell. And Yolande, that news from the WHO once again highlighting the delicate humanitarian situation in Gaza as Blinken visits the region.
That's right. It's a message that's coming out from the different UN agencies that are involved in this mass vaccination campaign, really made necessary after the first traces of polio were found, first of all, in sewage water in central Gaza in the middle of this year. And then they had the first case of a baby, an unvaccinated baby with polio in close to 2 decades. And it was really sort of underlined by the different UN agencies involved in this mass vaccination that it was really important to have this 2-stage program rolled out across all areas of the Gaza Strip. The first stage was completed successfully a month or so ago, and now they have carried out the second stage in the center of the Gaza Strip and in the south. But it seems they are unable to get the humanitarian pauses in fighting that are necessary in order for this to work in the north of the Gaza Strip. That's where Israel has been conducting a new military offensive against what it says are regrouping Hamas elements there. But we have had these forced displacement orders in the past couple of weeks. We've had, people, especially in Jabalia, which has been a big focus of the Israeli ground campaign, saying that they are unsafe, they can't get out, hospitals are being evacuated, people complaining about the complete lack of food, and so it's really led to a dire humanitarian situation. We have had, Mr. Blinken, who just left, talking about the importance of getting aid into Gaza and the north of Gaza in particular, saying that the US was tracking this every single day. But maybe the State Department is also aware that this was a likely announcement that to follow as he was leaving the country.
Yolande, thank you. That's our Middle East correspondent, Yolande Nell, with the very latest there from the region. Well, let's get more on our top story. And Donald Trump's presidential campaign has taken the extraordinary step of filing a legal complaint against the Labour Party, accusing it of blatantly interfering in the American election. Well, let's speak to CBS correspondent Jared Hill, who's in New York. And Jared, just tell us more about the reaction in the US to this story.
It's interesting, Catherine, because this is a story that hasn't really gotten a ton of traction here in the States, at least not yet. Again, what we know is that the Trump campaign filed this lawsuit, this FEC suit, just earlier this week on Monday. And so this is starting to trickle out here. But the allegation, as you were mentioning, is that the Labour Party, they say, was sending members and staffers here to the United States to campaign on behalf of Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, what we are hearing from the Labour Party is that these are people that are doing this on their free time, in their individual capacity, their spare time. They say that's what they have done in previous elections on both sides of the political spectrum. Here, the question is going to be if this has any sort of political repercussions here in the States for either former President Trump or Vice President Harris. But again, it'll be interesting to see how this develops over the next couple of hours, if not days.
Yes, exactly. In the midst of, what is a very intense presidential campaign, is this story likely to last more than 1 or 2 news cycles?
If I could give you the answer to that, then I would have a whole lot more money in my pocket because I could tell the future. What we do know is that a lot of these stories do move very quickly, especially, again, with us being just 13 or so days before the election, but there is always talk about the so-called October surprise and whether that is something that potentially could be a big enough story in the news cycle to really sway things. We'll have to wait and see. By and large, generally speaking, foreign policy and foreign dealings are not that huge of an influence on American politics and on the presidential election. Could this be one that actually breaks through in a different kind of a way? Yet to be seen.
Thank you very much. That's Jared Hill from our US partners at CBS. The UK will later sign a new defence agreement with Germany as the government seeks to strengthen its post-Brexit ties with Europe. Under the plans, German submarine hunting planes will operate from RAF Lossiemouth in Moray, and a Dusseldorf-based defence firm will open a new factory in the UK, which will produce artillery gun barrels made from steel from Sheffield. Our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale has the details.
Germany and the UK already train and work together as NATO allies. But the government says this new defence pact will take the relationship to another level, with more cooperation between their militaries and defence industries. All part of the government's push to reset relations with key European allies post-Brexit.
This is an historic agreement. It brings our UK and German militaries closer together, our industries closer together, both to strengthen our security and Europe's security, but also to boost our industries.
German and UK defence firms are already jointly making new armoured vehicles for the British Army at this factory in Telford. Under the new agreement, Germany would open a new factory in Britain to produce the barrels for artillery guns. The government says it'll sustain 400 jobs. They'll also jointly develop a new long-range missile. And German maritime surveillance aircraft will also periodically fly from RAF Lossiemouth in Scotland to join patrols of the North Atlantic, tracking Russian submarines. The overall goal is to boost NATO's defences. Jonathan Beale, BBC News.
Well, we can now speak to Justin Crump, military analyst and former British Army officer. Thank you for joining us on BBC News. So I guess the question is, why is this pact needed? I'm sure Germany and Britain have already been cooperating, especially under the NATO.
We absolutely have been cooperating for a very long time under NATO. I think there's a difference in the sort of cooperation we've had as NATO allies in the last 20 or 30 years, where a lot of it is very high level, strategic, interoperability, things like that we talk about. And actually there's a total difference in working together with troops on the ground next to each other. And that's where you discover lots of lessons about, for example, how your radios can talk to each other. You know, these much more operational things that, of course, really matter if it comes to a war. So I've worked alongside the Germans at a high level for much of my career. Very rarely have I ever been on exercise with them, working alongside German soldiers, with my soldiers, pulling together. So there is no substitute for joint exercises. And those have taken place. But given how long the British Army was based in Germany, it's actually amazing how long we never really worked alongside our German colleagues. So it's quite welcome to see that sort of more crunchy engagement taking place.
It seems this pact comes with a big investment from Germany into the UK economy. Just talk us through the main points of this agreement.
I think this is a direction of travel that's long been established. As Jonathan mentioned, the British Army's major equipment programs at the moment, particularly Boxer, that's a consortium that Germany is in. Challenger 3, so the upgrade of our tanks to a new standard, is largely being done with German help, all located in the UK, so it's all been kind of a joint effort. And artillery barrels, as we heard there, I mean, that is a weakness in what we have been able to produce as an army. And of course, when guns fire, they eventually wear down the barrels. You need new barrels. If you can't get new barrels, as Russia has found and as Ukraine has found, then of course you can't use your artillery anymore. So it's nice to see them investing in helping us rebuild that capability. In the air, we use the same aircraft, and there's a lot of commonality there. And again, it makes sense to cooperate on things like new missiles and particularly drones that can work with aircraft. That's a really emerging field of warfare that a fighter would have drones with it. So there's a lot of work on that. And then operationally, of course, we've heard the ability to extend patrols out into the Norwegian Sea in particular, and that thinking always about Europe's northern flank and the oil infrastructure there is really good to see as well as part of this. And again, that's because we both use the same maritime patrol aircraft and we help make up for each other's gaps, because neither of us have enough of them, frankly.
And both countries have faced criticism for underinvestment in their military strategies. Will a pact like this go some way to responding to those questions?
I mean, militaries are more than the sum of their parts. Ideally, you want to get a capability that is more than just the sum of what you have. And both countries have actually suffered from the same malaise, I think, as you say. So a pact is great. It allows us to do more together. It allows us to cover each other's gaps in our production, in our supply. We work better together on the battlefield. We work better together in the air and at sea. All great. It's not an excuse for complacency and not having invested. And Germany has only recently reached the 2% NATO target, largely as a result of alarm over Ukraine. So this is welcome. It shouldn't be used to patch over the cracks that we all have in our capabilities in this very dangerous time.
Thank you very much. That's Justin Crump, military analyst and a former British Army officer there. Thanks for joining us on BBC News.
Thanks.
Finally, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has arrived in Kazan to attend the second day of the Brics Summit of Emerging Economies in Russia. Ukraine's foreign ministry criticized Guterres this week for accepting the invitation from the Russian President Vladimir Putin, while staying away from a peace summit on the war in Ukraine. You're watching BBC News with me, Catherine Biarahanga. Stay with us. We'll be back after this short break.